Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Ryan Mills, one of the mentors for the Outcast by Muncie Outreach podcast. And what we have in store for you today is our first ever interview. Since this is Black History Month, the cast thought it would be great to interview individuals who stand at the intersection of blackness and queerness. So, I reached out to my dear friend, singer, songwriter, and musician, Mikala Jones, for an interview. The cast engaged in a rich conversation about music, the Black LGBTQ experience, and Black LGBTQ visibility in media. So I want everybody to sit back and enjoy as we kick off our first episode celebrating Black History Month.
Welcome to the Muncie Outcast. This is a very exciting episode for all of us here. It's our first interview. Tonight we have the wonderful and talented singer, songwriter, musician altogether, Mikala Jones. I'm your host, Jordan. My pronouns are they, them. I will pass it to my friend, Luke.
Hi, I'm Luke. My pronouns are he, him, they, them. I'll pass it to Rose.
Hi, my name is Rose. I go by she, her pronouns. Hi.
Hi.
Okay, Mikala, can you please introduce yourself, if you don't mind?
Oh, I thought the bio was going to introduce me, so I didn't have to. It's okay. Well, I was born and raised in Nashville, Tennessee, and I am a singer-songwriter mostly, but I also play rhythm guitar, and I'm self-taught on guitar. And yeah, that's basically what I enjoy doing. And I am openly out as a lesbian. I have been since I was 19 years old. So.
Okay.
Sorry.
Oh, okay. How did you get into music?
My grandmother actually used to do music. So my whole dad's side of the family is musical. We grew up listening to old school songs on the radio, as I think a lot of Black kids did. Just on the weekends when you're cleaning up, you listen to a lot of old school radio that your parents play. But my grandmother had a record deal when she was in her 20s, I want to say. And she had a couple of minor disco hits back in the 70s. And she ended up leaving that because she said it was just kind of an overwhelming kind of lifestyle, I guess, singing secular music because she came from a very Christian household. So after that, she ended up singing gospel music. And I remember from a young age, my mom said some of the first words I used to say, we would be in the car while she was driving, and she would turn the radio down, and I would say, "Hear it, mommy, hear it." So she would turn the radio back up. And then I used to sing Disney songs like I think a lot of kids did. And eventually I started wanting to do it more because I did strings 5th through 8th grade in middle school. And then in high school, I didn't really have an outlet for that because the school I went to didn't have a strings program. But then I decided to pick the guitar up rather, when I was about 19. So I've been playing ever since.
Wow.
Pretty cool. So you were raised in Nashville, and I was wondering what it was like navigating the music scene in Nashville, like as a Black queer individual.
It's weird because there is a lot of racism in the music community. That's to be understood, but I don't think it's as much in Nashville as people think it is. Even with it being in the Bible Belt, people assume that there is going to be a lot more focus on like Christian or I'm trying to think of the other one, Christian music, and I want to say, country. I don't know why I couldn't think of country, but those are like the two standouts in Nashville for if you want to be mainstream. So any other genre outside of that, that's what makes it harder, I would say, than being queer or anything, because Nashville is in Davidson County, and so Davidson County is actually a blue county. That's actually the only county this election that turned blue, and really any other election. So it's a really open-minded community, but I think if you're not doing one of those two genres, it's extremely hard. Also, Belmont is here, and a lot of kids from Berkeley come here. So if you didn't go to a music school, which I didn't go to a music school, it becomes extremely hard to try to fit into those groups and to figure out who wants to play music seriously, because the ones who want to play seriously have about 3 or 4 projects that they're already doing, so they don't want to join your project. And then the people who are willing to practice with you are usually the ones who don't have a really good work ethic, or they just don't have the time to do it. And so you end up taking time in between. But as far as being queer here, I would say it's very open. And I don't know if y'all know who Milo is.
I think I've heard of them.
Okay.
Yeah, sounds familiar.
Yeah, so Milo played Pride here last year or the year before.
I remember.
Yeah, and then also, I don't know if you guys have heard of Joy Elatakum. I'm probably saying her last name wrong, but she's like an up and coming queer artist too. And one of her songs was just in an episode of This Is Us. But I actually randomly did a show where I was singing background vocals for somebody else on the same bill as her, maybe like 2.5, 3 years ago. So it's funny to see where she is now, but the queer community here is actually, yeah, it's, I think the problem is that you just don't see as many people being openly queer when they perform more than anything. So.
Feels like a little weird to just jump into questions again, but so like one of the things that I was wondering, like when I was trying to think of questions, was like possible like discrimination within your industry for being Black and gay. But I mean, you sort of just talked about that, like so then maybe like instead of focusing on that, like for general music, like what artists have inspired you and your work, and has that like changed as you began to explore your identities like growing up? Like
yeah, it did. I grew up listening to a lot of my dad is really open-minded. He'll listen to a lot of weird music. My mom is a little bit more structured, so she doesn't really enjoy a lot of songs that have cuss words in them or songs that go too out of the pocket. So she listens to like Beyonce and Khalid and, you know, things that are very stereotypically in this lane of music. Whereas my dad listened to a lot of neo soul and like eclectic electronic music. And so when I was younger, it was definitely Amel Larue who she does neo soul, but it's a little more on the alternative R&B kind of circuit because she uses a lot of electronic sounds in her music. And I listened to a lot of this band called the Brand New Heavies, which they're in the UK and they do acid jazz. And India Davenport was the lead vocalist for them when they started out. And so those were probably the two biggest vocal inspirations to me. But as I started to get into high school and listen to more things, I was checking out like Alice in Chains and the Cardigans. So I was getting more into rock music and electronic as I was in high school, and then getting into like my little stint in college and all of that. But I think now that I'm older, it's really hard to pinpoint one specific thing that's influenced me because it's all like a melting pot at this point, and there's not really genre anymore. It's kind of dead at this point, just because unless you're doing like country music or pop music, it's really hard to say. So those were the things that probably shaped my formative years. But now that I'm an adult, I would say I listen to a lot more like psychedelic and electronic kind of music.
Cool. My dad raised me on very different types of music too. So it was just like, I could hear Viking metal sometimes coming out of his room, and I'm like, okay.
And it's weird because I feel like dads are way more open-minded to music. Because even my stepdad, he listens to a lot of the stuff my mom does, but we were in his car, and you can tell he rides a motorcycle just because I don't know what it is about motorcycle riders, but they'll all listen to like Machine Gun Kelly all the time, and like I don't know how to.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. How would you personally describe your music?
We're still evolving and growing. It's really funny because you wouldn't think that playing a different guitar could influence you, but it actually does. To people who don't play music, it sounds like, oh, it's a guitar is a guitar is a guitar. But I was doing a lot more R&B-ish, alternative R&B-ish kind of stuff when I was playing my Telecaster guitar. And then I always wanted to play music that wasn't in the R&B vein. And so after we lost our keys player, after we recorded, we started moving into a different direction because Ben, my musical partner, he plays, or he listened to a lot of like rock and hard metal growing up. And we fused our styles. And so the EP that we released was a little bit more on the R&B / psych / electronic kind of sound towards the end of it. But then when we got into the studio for this album, I wanted to do more psychedelic type of sounds. but I didn't have the guitar for that because a Telecaster it's very hard to make a Telecaster sound like a Jaguar, and that's the kind of guitar I wanted. And then luckily our producer had a Jaguar, and so this album I used that on all of them except for I think one song, and the sounds are a lot more in that psychedelic vein. I don't know if you guys know who Henry Mancini is. You probably don't, but he's a composer, and so he did a lot of. It's not really psychedelic, but it's orchestral kind of psychedelic, I guess, sounds from the 60s or the 50s or something like that. So we've incorporated sounds like that and had a lot more violins and all of that. So it's got a little bit of everything on it, I think, this time. So I don't know that I can really pinpoint what the sound is, but it's a lot more alternative.
Sorry, really quickly, what is a Telecaster?
So a Telecaster, it's a Fender guitar. Usually when people play guitars, they're going to be playing a Stratocaster. That's like the most known Fender guitar. And then the Telecaster, it's a little rounder. The body is a little rounder than the Stratocaster. Most people play it for like jazz, things like that, or at least it seems like that for like the neo soul people that you hear on YouTube or Instagram. The ones that are always playing neo soul on Instagram, they're usually playing like a Telecaster or something. But Jaguars are what people like the Beach Boys used to use because they have that whammy bar on it. Mm-hmm. So you can play it, and it has the rhythm switch. You hit up, and you can kind of strum like regular chords. But if you hit it down to this what's called the lead circuit, that's when it has like a jangle to it. So it has that surf kind of rock thing. If you listen to SpongeBob, somebody's probably playing like a Jazz Master or a Jaguar because of the kind of whammy and stuff that they're using.
Right.
I know there was a lot of like music stuff that people probably wouldn't
because my uncle had one.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to know what that was exactly.
All right. So, what do you think your favorite song you've made is, and why?
That's a really tough one. I want to say it's probably the song called Sunshine. And it's about my girlfriend, and I probably I probably like that one a lot because I was listening to a lot of Paul McCartney when I wrote it, and so and if you hear it, the way that the progression is over the chords, it definitely sounds like something that would have been on like Paul McCartney album. But that, and then it also, we got my friend Kristen to come in, and she plays violin. She actually has played strings with Dolly Parton and Eminem before. And so she came in and did, it's so pretty. It's weird because the beginning of the song, like I said, it sounds like it would be like a Paul McCartney kind of song. And then you get into the very end of the song, like the last 2 minutes of it, and it sounds like a strings arrangement that would be in like a rom-com trailer for a movie or something. So yeah, that's probably why, because we did a lot more of this album than we did with the previous music that we've done with the type of sounds that we use.
Speaking of that, what is your opinion on Dolly Parton since you grew up in Nashville?
That's so funny that you guys asked me that. I love Dolly Parton. It was just funny to know that that's like, everybody wonders about that when you're from Nashville. I'm really sad because there was a company that I bought a Dolly Parton shirt from them, and it was a ringer, and it said Dolly for president. And at the time I didn't know my measurements, and when I got the shirt, it was way too oversized on me, and so I was really sad because I'm probably gonna have to just wear it to bed or something. It's so good. But yeah, Dolly Parton is great. If my girlfriend was in here, she could tell you 1,000,001 things about Dolly Parton because she's watched her documentary and so much about Dolly Parton.
She should.
Dolly Parton's just such a neat lady.
She seems like she's really awesome. I think it's hilarious because I'm into zodiac signs, and Dolly is a Capricorn and her husband is a Cancer, and I'm a Cancer and my girlfriend is a Capricorn, and we always laugh about that because sometimes we're like, we're so different. We don't have anything in common. And then I look at them and I'm like, well, Dolly has been with, what's his name, Dean? Isn't that his name? Something like that. Yeah, she's been with her husband for 50-something years. I think we'll be okay.
Dolly's just an icon through and through, so.
Well, and she helped put money towards the vaccine here in Nashville that they were doing over at Vanderbilt, which was.
I've seen that and I love it.
Yeah, it's awesome. hopefully we're allowed to get the vaccine at some point. They're doing tiers here. I don't know if they're doing that for you guys, but it's like 70 older and then like 65 to 74, stuff like that.
Yeah. So then this is like sort of similar to the question that I asked earlier about like artists that inspired you. But so like when you're making music or performing music, like what personally for you inspires that? Like, is it like, do you like doing music because of like personal experiences, connecting to other people like through your music, exploring your own like emotions and thoughts through it, like that kind of stuff?
It's a little bit of everything, because when you're younger, I think everybody gets a little bit of stage fright, and so you have this sense of I don't think I can do it, and then when you finally get on stage and you do it, it's a sense of accomplishment. So sometimes there's that factor added into it on top of, you know, somebody was really awful to me today. Why don't I write a song about this? Or I've been in love and I had my heart broken by this person. But the kick is sometimes there's a caveat to that, because you'll be so inspired by one particular topic that by the time you want to write about something else, it's extremely hard for you to write it. So for a long time, for me, it felt like the only thing I could really write about was love or situationships that I had with other girls back in the past. And then it felt like all of my songs were about love and romance instead of actually being about world issues. The problem, there's nothing wrong with that, because if you're good at writing love songs, you're just good at writing love songs. But for me personally, it's based on the experiences that I have and wanting to be able to get on stage and say, I'm able to do this, because sometimes it is hard to get out there on stage in front of people. And then a lot of it's just inspired by sounds. I just enjoy creating things. And I think as long as your excitement about making things doesn't go away, then I think you'll be fine as an artist, because at the end of the day, it's not about getting the most streams in the world. It's about being able to kind of say, hey, I made my mark on the world because I made this piece of art. And this is what I felt at the time I made the art. And this is what came out of it. And then people are receptive to it. So those are all the things that kind of inspire me to want to create my art.
Okay. When did you figure out you were part of the LGBTQ community?
I want to say, how old was I? I was about 8, I think, and I had a crush on my principal. And I didn't know it was a crush. I just knew that I thought she was really pretty. And what was really funny is her mother used to go to church with my dad's mom. And so every now and then, if I went to my dad's parents' church, she would show up and I would be so excited to see her there. And I remember she had this one out, because she had really beautiful, long, kind of curly hair. And then she had this one dress it was kind of just straight black. It's like a teacher dress or something, but it stopped at her knee, and she wore like black tights, and it had buttons going all the way down the dress in the front, and it had those white cuffs and then a white collar. Do you know what I'm talking about? It was one of those
like Wednesday Addams.
Yes. And I remember, I don't know why that's what I specifically remember. And then she wore glasses, which is probably why I enjoy glasses. But yeah, that was probably the first time, but I kind of like pushed it in the back burner. And then when I got to high school, I started to be a little bit more, because I started getting into my mom's old CDs, and one of them was, or a few of them were her In Vogue CDs. And I went back and started, this was when YouTube first came out too, because, you know, I graduated in 2009. So they had all of the music videos first put on YouTube. And I was looking up all these interviews, because back then there wasn't a whole lot of copyright issues going on. So all of the interviews were posted and you could find all these videos. And I remember watching all of them, and I was just in love with Terry Ellis from In Vogue. And so when I was 15 was probably when I realized I might be a little bisexual, at least. And then I realized I was just gay.
Obvious.
I had a similar experience. I figured out I was gay. Well, my mom really kind of figured it out for me. I don't really remember a whole lot about this, but I was like, 4? And like I was on like the playground, and I used to like play Cinderella with this one girl. And like every day at recess, we would like play Cinderella together, and like we'd do the ballroom scene where they're getting married.
That's so
But you know, like Montgomery, Alabama, that shit doesn't really fly. So just kind of had to recoil a bit in middle school.
And you know what's crazy is when people say their parents don't know, your parents know. They just have, because Because my mom even said that when I was 12, she knew I was gay when I was 12 before I came out to her, because she said that I didn't like talking on the phone to boys. If I had a boyfriend, it was for like a day or two, and then I would break up with him. And I didn't like wearing fingernail polish. I didn't like wearing dresses. I always had to wear a pantsuit. So yeah, parents know.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
100%. Like when I was in elementary school and stuff, I didn't really have like a whole lot of close friends or anything. So I would
Mhm.
usually like watch shows and have like odd fascinations with all these pretty girl characters, you know. I finally realized I was into girls in middle school because I had like a super big crush on my best friend. But like eventually, like after experimenting stuff, I figured out I was a lesbian in high school. And like a few years after that, my mom tells me, "Oh yeah, with the way you watch those cartoons, I knew there was something going on." And like, you told me now, years later after I figured this out.
And it's funny, I probably should have known I was gay, because I also forgot this. When I want to say I was around 12 or something, I used to set my alarm to go off at probably between 2 and 4 o'clock in the morning. I can't remember what time it was, but that was when Charlie's Angels reruns aired on the TV Land channel. And I remember I just had to look at Jacqueline Smith because she was my favorite Charlie's Angel, and I realized,
Yeah. I had a weird obsession with one of my principal's forearms. I don't know what it was, but just the like seeing the muscles,
Forearm?
it was crazy. Yeah, like this part.
Oh,
Like whenever
God.
he'd wear long sleeve button ups and he rolled them up, I don't know why I just stared at them.
Do you know, Jordan, it's funny you say that. I don't know if you've watched Bridgerton, but everybody's been talking about, a few people on Twitter were talking about that, about they're so good looking because they don't roll their sleeves all the way up. They're kind of like to here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's like a really sexy arm, like t-shirt roll or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't understand what you're throwing.
So like, I grew up in Alabama, and I knew school there was tough being like gay and all of that jazz in there. So I knew that like your school experience couldn't have been that normal, with all of that going on. So I was wondering if you could maybe describe it like through middle school and like high school up until college, maybe.
Yeah. So middle school was a little weird because I don't know what was going on in Davidson County at the time, but when I was in middle school, it was 5th and 6th were a school, and then you went to 7th and 8th grade at a different school. And now I think it's all just 5th through 8th. But when I was at the 5th and 6th grade school, I didn't really feel like I had a lot of friends. I didn't really know what that was about, but I don't think I really had any thought about my sexuality then. I mean, I had a couple of boyfriends or something, I think, in middle school. And then 7th and 8th grade, I joined the cheerleading squad, and that it wasn't really that weird. I still didn't feel like I had like a friend group or people that were just my people. And so I thought, okay, maybe there's something wrong with me, but I kind of stayed a little more introverted. But I did have these 2 girls who were on the squad with me, and they were my best friends. And then when I got to high school, my mom had gotten remarried, and I didn't want to burden my grandparents with having younger kids back in the house again, because I had the option to live with my grandparents, but my aunt is exactly 4 years older than me. So as soon as she graduated high school, I started high school the next year. So I didn't want her to feel like she had to like have me there. So I went ahead and just went to my parents' house and lived with them out in Franklin, which, if you're not familiar with Franklin is about 45 minutes south from Nashville. So it's on the way to Huntsville. But when I got to high school, my freshman year was really weird. That was when I kind of started struggling with depression and anxiety, because I didn't really know anybody, and I'm an introverted person, so it's very hard for me to make friends with people unless I am introduced to them by people I already know. So the 2 friends that I had in middle school from the cheerleading squad, they would never answer my phone calls. It seemed as if they just were not wanting to talk to me or not wanting to be my friend anymore. So that I didn't have friends at that point. And I'm sure y'all know this. When you go to the cafeteria, there's the front of the cafeteria, and then as you get deeper into the back is where the popular kids sit. That's always how it goes. The very front table is always going to be the kind of weird people who don't really have a group. And then in the middle is always the artsy kids who are like in drama or the DECA or something. And then you get to the back, and that's when you get the football players and the basketball players and the cheerleaders and all of that. So I was at the very, very front of the cafeteria. And I just was like, I don't know. I don't feel like I'm fitting in with anybody. But luckily, people were cool with me and they would still talk to me. And then I decided to join the cheerleading squad when I was right before sophomore year. So my sophomore year through senior year is when I did cheerleading. And that was a lot better because I was friends with the girls on the squad. And then I started to gradually find a crew. But I came out to my cousin during junior prom. So at that time, I was kind of on the fence about what I was. And then I told him, I was like, I think I might like girls too. And he was like, really? And I said, yeah, but don't tell anybody because I'm not sure. And so I never, acted on it at all in high school. And it's really funny, side story. This girl, Hannah, that I went to high school with, she was on the soccer team and she wanted to be my friend so badly. And I didn't know why she wanted to be my friend. I just didn't understand it. And she came over to my house even at one point when I joined the cheerleading squad at one point. And we were like sitting on the bed and we weren't doing anything inappropriate. We were sitting upright and she was massaging my shoulders. And then I took turns and did her shoulders. I told my mom and my mom was like, Mikala, that's gay. And I was like, no, it's not. Like, she's not gay. And then when I ran into Hannah years later, she was like, oh yeah, I thought I might be gay. But then I was like, no. And so I think she was trying to like subliminally hit on me without saying that she was into girls. But that could have been my first experience with a girl. And it went right over my head. So back to coming out to my cousin, that's like the quintessential what happens in a movie. You just don't get it.
Yeah.
So, gosh. So then I was 15 and I came out to my cousin because he was my prom date, which that should have been an indication because I took my cousin to my junior prom. And then my senior prom, I had gotten a best friend at this point. I'm sorry, I'm skipping over a lot of things. I got some friends, but my senior year, I went to prom by myself and a guy asked me like the week of prom and I said no. And my mom was like, why won't you just let him pay for your ticket and all that? You don't have to spend money on it. I was like, nah, I don't want to do that because I was gay. Then I got and I get to college and I still haven't really come out to anybody, but I did have a dream about my roommate who happened to be my, which hopefully she doesn't feel weird if she ever hears this interview. I had a dream about her, which I'm not into her and I'm not attracted to her, but I think it was just the fact that I was close to somebody who was a girl who was friendly to me. And we went to high school together and we were on the cheerleading squad together and we just happened to room together when we got to college. And so that whole freshman year of college was awful. I didn't have a lot of friends. I didn't know what groups to be a part of. And I went to the Black Cultural Center and it felt like I didn't have any friends or nobody really was talking to me and I didn't know what to do. I tried to join the choir that they had. Nobody really talked to me. So that was when my depression kind of started getting bad too. And then I came back home and I worked full time. I worked like 2 jobs and my parents let me stay home. And that was kind of when I started to think more about my sexuality. And I came out to my mom at the grocery store. Ironically enough, we were getting groceries and then she was making a joke about my fingernails because I never wear polish and I always keep them short. And she was like, you're such a lesbian. And then we got to the car and I was like, well, maybe I like both. And she was like, well, then you just like what you like. And then that was the end of it. And I remember we were driving in the car and I just started bawling, crying. And she asked me what was wrong. And I was like, I just thought you were going to be mad at me. And she said, well, there are too many gay people in the world for that to be wrong. And so we, that was just the end of it. I never had to have a big deal with my mom. It was what it was. And then she told me when we got home, we were talking about it and she said, you need to watch the L Word. You need to learn about, like, that was my mom's first thing. And I don't know why I was afraid to come out to my mom because she literally had the L Word on DVD in her room. And so I don't know why I thought she would be upset. But I started watching the L Word. This was back when Netflix did DVDs and I had to wait for the DVDs for Netflix. And that was kind of like the beginning of my process of understanding more. And then I realized later on I was gay and then I met my first girlfriend and that was kind of it. But in high school and middle school and all that, I always felt a sense of not belonging, but I didn't know if it was related to my sexuality or not. I think it was related to it in that I didn't know who I was and I didn't know how to be my authentic self around people. But I think once I came to terms with that, I started figuring that out. But it took me until I was about 24, 25, to really realize who I was as a person. Because once I came out, I felt like I started making being a lesbian, like my identity. And so everything I did and everything I wanted to do was based around me being gay. And I had to go all the gay places only. I had to have only gay friends. Like that was just my MO with every single thing I did. Even when I went to a gay affirming church, it was like the pastor was gay. Everybody was mostly gay in that church. And, or they were some part of the LGBTQ community. But it was like I started making that my identity. But I think now as an adult, I realize more. And I have friends who are gay and I have friends who are straight, and it's a lot easier to navigate. But yeah.
Really quickly before we get another question, I have one that wasn't really on that list. You were talking about the gay church, and I remember hearing something. They taught you to speak in tongues.
They didn't teach me to speak in tongues. They had a class like that, and I'm not religious by any means. I'm actually reading Happiness Becomes You by Tina Turner because like that story relates to me because she's a Black woman from the South. Actually, she's from Tennessee and she grew up Baptist and she didn't feel connected to religion in that way. And so I feel the exact same way. And she's a Buddhist now. And so reading that book is helping me. And I've always known that I wasn't religious, but I know for a fact you have to be anointed in order to be able to do anything like speaking in tongues. That's just my firm belief. Because even as a child, if I saw people speaking like they were pastors or reverends or anything, I could tell when somebody was anointed or called to do that, or if they were not called to do that. And when you speak in tongues, that should be like God is speaking through you. It shouldn't be you trying to speak to God in tongues, because that's not how it works. He's speaking through you. So yeah, that was a weird experience. And I was weirded out when he said that he was going to do that to people, like teaching them how to speak in tongues, like 101 or something. And I'm thinking, this isn't how it works, but okay.
Have you ever had issues with conflict between your identity as a person of color, sexuality, and gender?
It's weird. I've had instances with being a woman and being a lesbian a few times. I don't think it's affected me as much as being Black has, though. Only because before I ever knew that I was gay, I always just kind of navigated the world as a Black woman. And even now, I know a lot of people don't say that, especially when it starts coming down to whether you're trans, because your trans identity is connected still to your Black identity and you know what I mean? So for me personally, though, because I identify as a cisgender woman, being a woman isn't that hard for me. It's the being Black part. Because even when I go into certain doctor's appointments, I feel like the doctor can be rushing me a lot. I actually went for a follow-up appointment. I saw this doctor and he basically made me feel like I was imagining the symptoms I was having. And the tests that he did weren't even the same tests that I had done when I went, or before I went to him for a second opinion. And so I felt like he didn't really care. And then when I wrote a review and gave him a bad review, he called me personally, I guess it was from a cell phone, and tried to make excuses and saying that maybe he was doing something. And I was like, no, you weren't doing that. And I was like, I don't have time to listen to this, because you're doing, in my mind, he was doing exactly what he was doing at the appointment, which was focusing less on apologizing to me and trying to understand what my issue was and reassuring me, and more about getting me out of the door because he didn't think there was anything wrong with me. There have been certain instances too with, like I remember an instance when I was on the bus in high school and I was getting ready to walk off the bus, because the middle school and the high school where I went to school were right across the street from each other. And they drove to the high school first. And when I was getting off the bus, I heard this kid say something, and I was the only Black one on the bus. And he said a joke about Black people, and he was like, what do you call Black people rolling down the hill? And he was like, the tagline of the joke was, they're mudslides. And he said that right as I was walking off the bus. And I looked at him, and all four of his friends and him looked at me, and I didn't even say anything. I just walked off the bus after I looked at them. Like, do you not realize how uncomfortable and how rude and disrespectful that is? So it's like situations like that. Or there was a kid, and he was actually half Mexican, and he and I were in the hallway one day, and he kissed me, and I could tell he liked me. And the very next day, he acted like nothing ever happened. No, I don't think anybody to this day at my high school still even knows I kissed him. There was a time where I worked at a restaurant, and this guy was a white guy, and he came from an impoverished background, which I understand that. I wasn't destitute by any means, but there were times when my family didn't have a lot of money. And he would always switch to like African American vernacular just to kind of fit in with me. And he would never do it to anybody else that was there. And he tried to blame it on the fact that he grew up in a certain area, or that's just how he grew up. But I was like, you realize you're saying that, but you don't say that. You don't talk like that to anybody else but me. I don't know if it's some kind of familiarity, but like, yeah, you grew up poor, but I didn't grow up that way. So why are you all of a sudden looking at me like I'm a familiar face, or like I'm somebody you can talk like this to? So there, there's that. Or there have been times where I was on the cheerleading squad in high school and someone asked what a jigaboo was, and I had to tell them what it was, and they were all laughing like, no, come on. And I was like, I know what a jigaboo is. That's what a jigaboo is. And they got really awkward and quiet. So, I could go on and on and on, but like that's been my experience, is that I feel like my Blackness has preceded a lot of my other experiences.
Kind of going off of what you just said, sorry to interrupt Rose if she was just about to ask anything. I was wondering, how you felt about, white members of like the gay community kind of like appropriating African American vernacular English, because I've seen it happening like a lot more than, than it had been in the past. And I don't know if it's because everybody's like thinks it's cool or on the internet, or I just wanted to get your input on how it's harmful, if you think it is.
I think it's harmful, mostly because I think I kind of equate it to, because I was watching a little bit of a video earlier today. I didn't get a chance to finish it, but someone was talking about Cajun and Creole culture down in Louisiana. And that's probably the best thing I can think about when I talk about African American vernacular English, is because there are people who are, I think it's Arcadian, Cajun, and Creole people still speak some of those dialects and a lot of those phrases. And it's like true to their culture and their heritage and where they come from, even though those are kind of dead languages. When you think about the list of languages that people know in America, those are kind of more on the dead side, but they still belong to those people because that's what they grew up in and that's part of the culture. It would be the same as me going in there and spending time around them and kind of taking that from them and using that in other places, but I'm not rooted in that culture. It's not part of me and who I am. And African American vernacular is like, it's not just about the words. It's about the intention behind them, the inflection. It's about just the way that we do things. Because the perfect example is probably when me and my girlfriend were talking last night about how Black people hype each other up. We never just say, oh, I like your outfit. That looks really nice. Part of African vernacular English is we'll say, oh, you better. Or like, we'll say something that's like hyping them up. We won't do anything that's really making them, know for sure, like, hey, you look very nice. You look very pretty. Oh, I like the way that looks on you. Oh, that's really beautiful. We'll always hype each other up, but that's just part of our culture, is to do that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I just think this was sorry, my English. I think this was a good opportunity for it to get like out there that African American vernacular is a lot more than just like internet slang, how people have been calling it. And yeah. I kind of just wanted to take this opportunity to let it be known that it's more like of a cultural thing than like a thing of the times.
Yeah, and it's really funny because there were times where I thought it didn't really exist, or that I thought, oh, maybe people are just exaggerating. And when I worked at a job a few years ago, there was this guy, Jasper, who sat right next to me, and he was also Black. And we had a coworker behind us named Jade. And it was the three of us that were still left in the office. And Jasper and I were talking, and we were cracking up. And Jade said, don't take this the wrong way, but you guys talk differently to each other than you do to me. And I was like laughing so hard. And I told my family that, and my brother said, I knew that white people thought that we spoke differently to each other, but I didn't know they noticed it. And so, it was just one of those things where I didn't even pick up on it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It's like talking about African American vernacular English. There will be like a lot of times where I'll see like people of color pointing out to gay people, like, that's not really your language, even though you guys use it all the time, like that's not for you. And then there'll be people who like say like, well, Black culture and LGBT culture sort of have like intermingled sometimes. And it's like, yes, but that language still is not for you just because we have a close history with those two communities. But so then like that's making me think about like the communities themselves and how like it's weird to me how some people will acknowledge that like the Black and LGBT communities have like a close tied history with each other, but then there'll be other people who like try to pit those communities against each other. And that's like not just a like now issue, like that's happened in the past too sometimes. It's like, do you have like any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think a lot of that stems from the fact that because there are Black people who happen to be LGBTQ, I think our racial identity gets lumped into our gender or sexuality identities. And like I was saying earlier, for me personally, I identify separately from each of my identities. And I don't think they're connected to each other. Granted, I do think being Black in the LGBTQ community sometimes has kind of not been a great experience, but like overall, I attribute that mostly to my Blackness and less to my being gay, if that makes sense. So I think when people start talking about issues, they lump them together because there are Black people who happen to be gay or trans or non-binary, or you know what I mean? Like there's so many separations of who we are. But if you lump the Blackness in there with it, it'll feel like it's not getting left behind. But then when we try to talk about it and bring kind of like awareness to the fact that, hey, some of us feel a little different about our identities, then that's when I think people start assuming we're all trying to be pit against each other. But it's really mostly just like how I'm saying, some people's identities coexist. Some people like me, our identities are completely separate. So
yeah, I feel like that's actually like really important though, with the whole like keeping those identities like not pitted against each other, but like separately acknowledging them. Because like I know like in my experiences with the LGBT community, there will be like individual issues that are specific to each of the like smaller communities within. And there's a lot of people who don't want to address those issues because they don't want to like go into individual communities.
Yeah.
So like that sort of is like that, but in a different sense, because it's like racial identity and gender identity, and acknowledging how like yes, those people can have both of those, but that each of them have their own individual issues that need to be like addressed at times. So that's a really good point. I get that.
Absolutely.
And then like sort of branching off of that, I have like a question written down. I gotta find it.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay, so then in regards to how it is true that like Black people have been involved in the LGBT community like for like a while, like I don't have specific people in mind because I'm not good with history like in a general sense. But so could you tell us how you feel about the erasure of Black history, influence, and contributions in queer history, and how they don't always get highlighted as much as white people?
I wish I could speak more about that. I'm just like you, and I don't know a whole lot. I know who Marsha P. Johnson is, but there's only so much I even really know. I think because for me, I'm still trying to catch up on Black history, like just individual Black history as it stands, that I'm a little further behind when it comes to LGBTQ history. If my girlfriend wasn't here, she'd be able to tell you everything. She's watched Paris is Burning. She's watched Pose. She just loves it all. But yeah, I don't know. It upsets me that a lot of Black history is left behind, only because they're, like we were saying about African American vernacular English and even ballroom culture that's rooted in people of color. And it kind of gets whitewashed as it keeps going down. And less people, like, I don't care if anyone does ballroom culture or if that's what they're into. I think being able to acknowledge someone's history, because that's when it starts becoming appropriation, is when people are not acknowledging the history that comes before it. But like I said, I don't really know as much about Black LGBTQ history just because I'm still so behind on a lot of Black history.
I have a lot of people in my life who like see this and like put them against each other like an MMA fight. But what do you think people like about pitting the Black and LGBTQ community against each other?
I think they do it to try to incite violence. Not always physical violence, but just cause disagreements across all fronts so that we'll all appear as a disgruntled group of people and none of us are actually organized and together and for each other. I think there's a reason why people do that. They're not doing it because they actually care about either one of the groups, but if they can put us against each other, it can make it harder for us to work together in order to be able to like move forward with both of our civil rights causes.
That makes a lot of sense, actually, because I never really thought about it like that.
Yeah. It's easier to make somebody seem crazy if they're the ones like doing all the talking, and you're the one who's silent, but you like secretly putting things in people's ears and spreading all this gossip and misinformation. So then they end up looking crazy, and then you end up looking fine.
I've noticed a lot of that cultural gaslighting in recent years. I've noticed a lot of people in the LGBTQ community being especially like racist towards people in the Black community, and I've noticed people in the Black community like saying things like that's sus and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I think that's really just like the effects of like the gaslighting from the government and from like the media in general trying to pit us against each other. And I think that we need to all together work on like lifting each other up for what we are, because while being gay is like a disadvantage you get in life, people will notice that somebody's Black before they notice that they're gay. And I think that some communities really need to realize that, and realize that when you're like appropriating things from that culture, like what effect and the erasure that you're putting on this culture, that what exactly that they're really doing, instead of just thinking that they're just using some type of trend or like that.
And it's funny you say that before, and I'll stop. But I actually did a video training yesterday or the day before on something called radical candor. And it actually applies to a lot of things, not just at work. But we have this habit as individuals. It doesn't matter if you're Black, white, gay, straight, queer, whatever. We all have a habit of talking at each other instead of talking to each other, and we don't really listen. So radical candor kind of teaches you to be able to give your point with fact and only relate it to yourself and not to a mass group of people, but also being able to say it in a way that has a lot of tact. If more people in the country and in the world really just practice that, it would be so much easier for people to get their points across, because you'd be able to say things that are less emotionally driven and more factually driven. So I think that's another problem too.
Mm-hmm.
So you did an interview with Love Montage, and you mentioned that you attended therapy. How's that affected your life and your music?
Well, for me personally, I don't have the best relationship with my dad. And so that was I had already had issues, with depression in general and just anxiety, and I have imposter syndrome. So it's, that's always going around. But my main reason for going was I had a bad falling out with my dad, and I actually haven't talked to him in almost 2 years now. But it was just getting to the point where I couldn't really formulate my thoughts or process my feelings. And I'm the type of person where even if my dad hurt me, I always psychologically think about how he feels, and I had to stop doing that. And I'm also the oldest child, and a lot of responsibility gets put on me. So I had to learn how to establish my boundaries so that I could be able to say no to my parents a lot more. So that was my main reason for going. It's helped tremendously in being able to have boundaries, because now I'm able to tell my mom, no, I can't do that. I feel exhausted. I can't do that. And it allowed me the space to be able to say, nope, I need to just block my dad's number. Like, he lost his dad, and I sent him something to like, it was like a care package for men for like a bereavement package or something like that. It had like soaps and stuff in it, but I still didn't talk to him, but I still sent him something with a note in it. So like, therapy has been able to help me to be able to say, okay, I'll still let you know that I love you, but I'm going to do it at arm's length, and I'm going to do it on my own time. It also makes it easier for me in my personal relationships with my friends, and even with my girlfriend, because my girlfriend and I go to therapy too together, because I just think it's necessary for anybody. It helps me be able to let go of things and to not hold on to things, because that's one of my biggest problems, is that I would always hold on to things that affected me and I could never let them go. And I'm an empath. My therapist has told me I am an empath. And so, you know, I would take on people's feelings all the time, and even my girlfriends, and I had to get out of that. And being in therapy has actually helped me with that too, because when she's upset or she's angry or super excited, I don't take on her feelings anymore. I accept what she's giving and that's what she's got going on right now, but I don't let it affect me. So I think therapy is necessary for anything. You could be having a really great life and everything's good, but I still think it's great to check in with a therapist, because sometimes things you don't even think about could pop up in a session.
Okay, kind of to jump off of that too, do you think mental health is an important aspect to focus on in the Black and queer community?
Absolutely. My granddad, I love him so much, but he is really bad about saying, and this is, I quote him directly, "Get over it. Get over it." Like, that's literally what he says every single time something is going on, or you got some problems going on, because that's just his generation. And the same with my parents' generation. And I think it's extremely important, because I think, and it's funny, I went to my first therapy session and I told my therapist why I was there. And I didn't tell him a whole lot about my dad. I didn't tell him a whole lot about our interactions. I told him one specific story that had just recently happened. And the first words out of my therapist's mouth was, "It sounds like your dad's a narcissist." And then, and everybody has always said that about my dad, like he's selfish and he only thinks about himself. And it was really odd, because the more and more I talked about him, my therapist said that my dad is a narcissist. He has narcissistic behavior. And it's crazy, because had he not had people enabling him his whole life, and had he been able to go to a therapist, because he has issues with the fact that his dad abandoned him. Like, he didn't really have a good relationship with his dad growing up. And then his dad just recently passed away last year. So now, because he didn't go to therapy, and because he didn't try to fix his relationship with his dad before his dad passed away, he's going to have to live with that for the rest of his life. And knowing my dad, he's not the type of person to let things go very easily. And it could have saved him so much heartache and so much, because he's in his 50s now. And so now he's in his 50s and he's having to process that. And that's probably messing him up even more than it was before his dad died. So I personally think that's necessary. I think it's necessary for LGBTQ people, just because we're more prone to having depression and anxiety than the average person.
Yeah.
People of color and LGBTQ people are just statistically more likely to have more issues emotionally. And I think it's important. I think it's especially important for people who have dysphoria. I think it's important for people who have who don't associate with their the gender they were born as. You know what I mean? Like, it's also important because we live in a country where it is so hard for people to be able to start hormone replacement therapy practices, that I think it's really, really necessary to go to therapy, because the sooner you know that, the easier it'll be for you to start the process to advocate for yourself. Because right now, we don't have as easy of resources for a lot of people, especially if you don't have insurance. It's really hard for you to have top surgery or any kind of surgery for that matter. You know what I mean? So I think it's necessary, because therapy helps you kind of sort out your thoughts and figure out, so that you can start advocating for yourself at a younger age.
So, like, sort of like moving on to a different topic. This was like really good to talk about. And just before I go into my next question, I find that like the talk about your dad just like a little bit funny, just because I don't have a good relationship with my dad, and he's also a narcissist, and his dad also passed away last year.
Oh,
like,
man.
It's just like one after another. I'm like, that's very similar to my dad. So,
it sucks, because you feel like you're having to bear the brunt of that, but then you have to say, no, it's not. That's yours. That's yours.
Yeah. I like barely talk to them. It's crazy.
Yeah.
But so like, visibility in the media is like a big thing, and like going into the future, like as time is passing on, there is more visibility within the media for the Black community, for the LGBT community, and for like both like characters who are both. If that was worded weird, but so like, how do you feel about visibility in the media right now for people who are both Black and LGBT? Is there enough probably not, but like still want to ask, like, do we need more? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I feel like we're starting to see more in terms of shows and miniseries, things of that nature on like Netflix. I'd like to get to a point where the Black character has more of a background of like an actual story and less of being the friend role. I'd like to see less LGBTQ characters having to experience heartbreak, because I watched Happiest Season with Kristen Stewart and it wasn't a bad movie. But for me personally, I know there were some people that I follow who are LGBTQ, some Black, some white, and a lot of them felt very triggered and misrepresented, and they felt like they were experiencing trauma all over, especially if their coming out process was very hard and they're having to see this happen on film. So I don't think every coming out or every series that has gay characters in it needs to be full of trauma. Probably the best representation of that I've seen, I don't know if you guys watch Sex Education, but yes, Eric's character that show is the prime example of what I like to see in diversity, because there are Indian characters, there are Hispanic or Latinx characters, there are white characters, Black characters. The best dynamic is the fact that Otis is a straight white man who is not afraid to be best friends with a Black gay Nigerian man. And so you see them and their friendship and how they're close to each other. They're affectionate with each other. Like they'll hug each other when they're upset and console each other. They'll dance with each other. And there's nothing wrong with it. And it's never, ever having to be addressed in the show. I'm past the point of us having to address the point leading up to them being comfortable to it. Why can't we just automatically start at, they're just comfortable with it. That's it. So that's probably the best show I've seen with representation. I think the L Word is trying to get it right. They did a terrible job the first series with how they wrote Max, who was a trans character, because he just had a lot of terrible things happen to him, which was really unnecessary for his character. But this series, they're doing it a little bit better. There's a new character who is trans in the new series. I forget his name, and he's actually an Asian actor too, which made me really happy to see Asian representation. But yeah, I think we need to see more of that in shows where it's not just talking about the trauma, and then we need to see, just people with complex stories, actual backgrounds.
So I kind of have a question that's not really on the list. I do a lot of work for my mom, who works at a library, and I illustrate stories for her sometimes, and I try to make them as diverse as possible. And with a children's story, how would you, just like being you off the top of your head, give me like advice to include in like a Black queer character? Like what would like, to put it more simply, how do you think it would be best represented for like a child to see it?
I think first and foremost, I think it's most important to have darker skinned characters. And this isn't just for Black characters, it's also for South Asian characters too, because I feel like that doesn't get represented as much either. There's so much colorism, and it's a lot easier for somebody to find someone like me palatable, whereas, my girlfriend is darker than me, and people will look at her, and anytime she wears makeup or anything like that, they'll say she's pretty, but then if she doesn't wear anything, it's like they instantly don't notice her or something. Or, you know what I mean? It's always like she has to be kind of sexualized in a way for people to find her attractive, instead of just people liking her in her natural state. So I think that's important, just to have dark skin in general.
All right.
Yeah, that's great, actually, to hear. Is it okay if we go back really quickly about the Love Montage podcast real quickly? You were talking about separating ideas and art from the individual. I was wondering if you could repeat that point here.
Yeah, I think it's completely possible to do, but it also depends on the person and what the extent of what it is that they're doing. So like Bill Cosby, for example, he's a abuser. It's easier for me to separate him from the Cosby Show simply because that show was not about molestation. It's not about him raping or assaulting anyone. Any of the dialogue on that, none of it is about all of the stuff that he's done to these women. Whereas you have on the other end of the spectrum, someone like R. Kelly. You can't separate R. Kelly from his music because all of his songs are about underage girls. And that is a proven fact. We've had documentaries. So I think it depends on the context of whatever the content is in relation to who the person is as an individual. I think that has a lot of precedence on whether or not it's something that you can still continue to stream or watch or whatever. Because I know a lot of people will kind of like cringe a little bit, but I do still watch The Cosby Show. I still watch some things that Bill Cosby has been in. I still listen to a lot of, he has jazz music. I still listen to his jazz music, but I understand that that's not the person that Bill Cosby is. Whereas R. Kelly, I don't stream his music anymore. I've deleted whatever I could remember was in my libraries anywhere. I made sure I deleted those out so that they were not ever going to get any more play. And I also believe art is an extension of the person, but sometimes we have a good habit of dissociating ourselves from what it is that we're writing. So that's why you kind of have to take it with a grain of salt, what people's material is, unless they flat out tell you what it's about.
So I was wondering I was wondering for you how different marketing is in like the era of streaming and all that.
It's very difficult because back in the 90s, record labels were way more lucrative because you were making more money on the albums being sold, whereas now, because they're streaming, you only get paid per play. So we're making about 3 cents roughly per stream that someone does on a song. So that makes it difficult because you're trying to return on your investment. But with marketing, there's algorithms and there are apps that you can download to figure out when are the days that you get the most interaction from people, but you also have to pay for those. And then there's also the fact of you have to pay for album artwork, and you have to pay for if you want to get a lyric video done for one of your songs, or if you want to do like for our album artwork, we reached out to this guy Mariano out in I think he's in Mexico, or I can't remember where. But he created our album artwork, but he also, after he sent us the album artwork, said, hey, I can do an animation for you. So we also have an animation of our album artwork. So, he gave us like a 60-minute one, and he gave us also a 15-second one to put on Instagram. So that's really helpful if you have things that you can get one copy of something and then have an animation of that thing. And it makes it a little bit easier to kind of market the same thing over and over again in different ways. The problem is just figuring out how you're going to get the most interaction. Like, what days are people going to like your post the most? Or what song do you think people are going to gravitate to the most when you post it so that they want to go stream the album on Spotify, So that's a big thing.
So I know that like earlier you mentioned how as we're getting like into like modern times or whatever, like music, like genre is starting to like dissipate a little bit. Mm-hmm. And I mean, no doubt that's like partially because of the like how it's like very on social media and the streaming and stuff now. Mm-hmm. So like in this era of social media and streaming and stuff, like do you think it like cheapens music at all? I don't really know if that's like a good word for what I'm thinking of, but just how does it like impact that?
Yeah. Now? I think what it does is it oversaturates the industry more than anything. I think there's a place for everyone. The key is because on Spotify, I don't know if Apple does this too, because I haven't really looked at their app as much, but on Spotify's artist app, you can see which cities you trend in the most. So the key is really what genre or what style do you gravitate towards? Because with, trying to think of an example, like I listen to a lot of, like I said, psychedelic music and stuff like that, or ambient music. I know for a fact, just based off of the regions that a lot of these artists are coming out of, if I was going to make like super hardcore psychedelic music and I wanted to be in another city, because I do want to move out of Nashville at some point, the best cities for me to do that would be Portland, Oregon, it would be Seattle, Washington, or it would be California, either in LA or San Francisco, or even in San Diego, places like that. It might do well in New York, but that's kind of hit or miss because you mostly have like jazz and R&B and Broadway people in New York. or I would also probably do well in the UK, over in London, or Australia. So you have to like, it's easy there. Yeah, that it's overly saturated with the social media, and genres are getting kind of bent. But if you know where a lot of these artists are deriving from, because even you would be able to figure this out, even not because you're not a musician, are you?
No.
Yeah. So if you were a musician, Rose, and you were on Spotify and listening to artists and you saw all the artists that were recommended to you, you go under Tame Impala, most of the artists they recommend to you are going to be people in the UK, or they're going to be people in Australia. So that would kind of give you the mindset of, okay, all of these big bands are coming from this same area. Maybe that's where I need to be. And a lot of people assume that you don't have to be at Beyonce level. You don't have to be at Tina Turner level. You don't have to be Michael Jackson or anybody that's super huge and famous, or Ariana Grande. As long as you find a city where you have a community of people that you can play on a bill with, you can make a killing, especially if you're in a city where people love live music. It is super easy to gain access. It just comes down to what I said earlier. Be in a city where you know that people are going to enjoy your music, where that's the style, you're going to find people who enjoy that music. Two, you need to find people who have the same work ethic as you and who are willing to play shows with you and don't require you to pay them to play with you either. So those are two big things. If you have those, it's really easy to do the marketing stuff on top of that, because it just comes down to getting on a bill with somebody who's well known, and then from there you can kind of do your own stuff.
Yeah. Thinking about performing live, and like with the pandemic and how like doing stuff like that isn't really like possible. How has the pandemic and all the other stuff that happened throughout 2020 affected your work or your process or both? Like, how has that been as an experience for you?
It affected my writing process, mostly because I was feeling kind of uninspired, because I'm one of those people where even though I get inspiration out of certain situations, like a song will just kind of come to me. We set the deadline to record our album in October last year, and so I had to write songs by that time, and it was very hard for me because I was feeling kind of burnt out. My grandmother died at the beginning of last year, so that was hard. And then on top of that, like, you know, that was affecting me, and my job shifted to working from home. So I still have a 9 to 5, which was fortunate for me because my company let go of a lot of people. But I think it mostly affected just me being able to write as much as I wanted to, because I didn't feel as inspired, because I'm the type of person where I want to just go to a coffee shop or something after work, or maybe just randomly go to the East Room, which is on Gallatin Road, and catch a show, or go to Cobra with one of my friends and go grab a drink or something. But it's hard to find inspiration where you're not able to interact with people as much. And luckily it didn't affect our recording process, because we went to a studio where they really sanitized everything down. And the guy I make my music with, Ben, he and I don't really go out a whole lot, just because we don't want to be around a bunch of people right now. So it made it extremely easy for us to get in and record everything. And then yeah, we don't have a lot of merch or anything we don't have any merch at the moment, so it didn't affect anything. But if we were to have merch, the biggest benefit to doing something like Bandcamp is that they do have Artist Fridays, where 100% of the sales that they have on the site go directly to the artist, so the artist is not having to pay for the distribution.
Yeah, that's really cool that they do that, especially because everything's so crazy right now.
Okay, I just wanted to say thank you for joining us. Where do you see yourself in the near future, and any plans coming up, and where can people find you?
Well, they can find my band Hot Lives at the social media handle Real Hot Lives. So RealHotliv as in Victor ES. And then my handle, if you guys want to follow me, I'll follow you back. It's Mac Jones 91. So M as in Michael, AK, JONES 91. We just sent the second set of notes for our album. So we're hoping to get the last, hopefully, set of mixes back in the next couple of weeks. And then once we listen to that, we'll be able to say, okay, these are ready to be mastered. So then the songs will be mastered, and then we'll release the album, hopefully like a month and a half after that. So we're assuming around like April or so, we'll be starting to release singles and music. we have the artwork for all the singles and for the album. And then, yeah, for me personally, I'm trying to be better about collaborating with other artists in the area, just because I'm really bad about not putting myself out there. My girlfriend and I were actually talking about that last night, because I'm very bad at imposter syndrome, where I feel like nobody would want to listen to me, or I feel like I'm not good enough to work with this person or whatever. So it's really just a matter of me getting out of my comfort zone and performing with more people. And then, yeah, hopefully I'll put out something. I have Logic, but my computer is really old, so it's really hard to record things successfully on it. So I'm hoping to do some more like electronic type stuff. And then as far as me personally getting out, hopefully out of Nashville at some point once the pandemic is over. My 30th birthday is this year, and I won't get to go anywhere probably. So looking at probably next year for plans, but yeah.
All right. Thank you again for joining us, but thank you everybody for listening. It means a lot to us here. But if you need somebody to talk to, look up the Trevor Project, Muncie Outreach, or the Suicide Hotline, which is 800-273-8255. We all here care about you very deeply, so please take care of yourself, and we'll see you all in the next episode.